There is a moment right before every downfall in history that looks almost identical. A brilliant general, a cunning politician, a rising star of industry, all of them undone not by an enemy's sword, but by their own face. A flash of anger they couldn't suppress, a flicker of fear an opponent caught and exploited, a wave of desire that clouded their judgment for exactly the 3 seconds it took to destroy decades of careful work. I have spent my life studying power, and if there is one truth that separates those who wield it from those who are crushed beneath it, it is this: the emotional mind is faster than the rational one. By the time you feel calm again, the damage is already done. Your rival has already seen your fear. Your enemy has already read your desperation. Your rage has already handed them the very weapon they needed. Most people believe self-control means suppression, clenching your jaw, swallowing your feelings, pretending. This is amateur hour. True masters of emotion do something far more sophisticated. They do not deny what they feel. They observe it the way a general observes a storm rolling toward his army, not with panic, but with cold, calculating attention. They let the emotion rise, they study its shape, and then they decide consciously what the world is permitted to see. This is not about becoming cold or robotic. It is about becoming dangerous in the most refined sense. A person whose inner world can no longer be read, predicted, or manipulated by others. In the next several minutes, I am going to show you exactly how history's most formidable figures transform their emotions from a liability into their sharpest weapon. Some of what you're about to hear will unsettle you. Good. That means you're paying attention. Before you can control your emotions, you must first accept an uncomfortable truth. You are not as rational as you believe yourself to be. This is the great myth of the modern mind, that we think then feel. In reality, it is almost always the reverse. The emotional brain, ancient and animal, reacts first. It floods the body with chemicals, narrows the vision, quickens the pulse, and only afterward does the rational mind stumble in, breathless, trying to construct a story that justifies what has already happened. Consider the fate of countless kings, generals, and titans of industry who believed themselves masters of logic, only to be brought down by a single moment of unchecked feeling. The pattern repeats endlessly through history because the mechanism never changes. The amygdala does not care about your reputation, your decades of strategy, or your carefully built empire. It cares only about the perceived threat in front of it right now. Left unchecked, it will burn everything you've built to deal with a danger that 9 times out of 10 was never as urgent as it felt. This is why the first law of emotional mastery is not suppress your feelings. It is know your feelings before they know you. Most people go through life as passengers in their own bodies, discovering what they feel only after they've already acted on it. They snap at a colleague and only later realize they were anxious about something unrelated. They make an impulsive purchase and only later understand they were trying to numb a feeling of inadequacy. This is the condition of the unexamined mind, reactive, transparent, and endlessly exploitable by anyone skilled enough to read it. The masters operate differently. They treat their own emotional reactions as data, not commands. When anger rises, they do not ask, "How do I express this?" They ask, "Why is this here and what is it trying to tell me?" Anger, properly interrogated, almost always reveals a boundary that has been crossed or a fear that has been triggered. Envy reveals a desire we're ashamed to admit. Anxiety reveals an uncertainty we have not yet mapped. Every emotion, no matter how uncomfortable, is a messenger carrying real information about your position in the world. The amateur shoots the messenger. The master interrogates him. This requires what I call strategic distance, the ability to step back from your own reaction in the very instant it occurs, as though watching yourself from across the room. This is not a mystical skill reserved for monks and sages. It is trainable like any muscle through repetition and deliberate practice. It begins with the simplest of disciplines, the pause. Between the stimulus and the response, there is a gap, however small. In that gap lies your entire freedom as a strategic being. Fill that gap with awareness, and you transform from a puppet of your own nervous system into its commander. History's great strategists understood this instinctively, even before neuroscience gave us the vocabulary. Statesmen who survived decades of shifting alliances and betrayals did not survive because they felt nothing. They survived because they refused to let what they felt dictate what they revealed. Behind closed doors, they might have raged, wept, or trembled with fear. In front of rivals, they showed nothing but calculated calm, because they understood a brutal law of power. Whoever is more emotionally transparent in a negotiation has already lost half the battle before a word is spoken. There is a darker layer to this as well, one most people would rather not confront. Your emotions are not entirely your own. They are in large part engineered by your upbringing, by your culture, by the very people around you who benefit from your predictability. Advertisers manufacture desire, manipulators manufacture guilt. Rivals manufacture provocation, deliberately baiting you into a reaction that serves their interests, not yours. Every time you respond instantly and unreflectively to an emotional trigger, you are, in a very real sense, executing someone else's strategy instead of your own. This is the war within, not merely a battle between your rational and emotional selves, but a battle for the ownership of your own reactions. Every day you are being pulled, prodded, and provoked by forces that profit from your impulsiveness. The undisciplined mind is a resource to be harvested by anyone patient enough to learn its patterns. The disciplined mind, by contrast, becomes unreadable, unpredictable, and therefore untouchable. To begin reclaiming this territory, you must adopt what I call the observer's posture. Throughout your day, at random intervals, ask yourself a simple but piercing question: what am I feeling right now and why? Do not judge the answer. Do not rush to fix it. Simply name it the way a scientist names a specimen before dissecting it. Over weeks and months, this practice builds an internal map, a growing awareness of your own patterns, your triggers, your vulnerabilities. And with that map comes something invaluable: the ability to anticipate your own reactions before they happen, and therefore the power to redirect them. This is where true mastery begins, not in some dramatic act of willpower in the heat of a crisis, but in the quiet, unglamorous accumulation of self-knowledge, day after day. Until the war within becomes a war you are finally equipped to win. Once you have begun to master the emotions within yourself, a new and far more dangerous skill becomes available to you: the ability to read the emotions of everyone around you. This is not empathy in the soft, sentimental sense most people imagine. This is empathy as reconnaissance, the cold, clear-eyed observation of what others feel, so that you can anticipate what they will do before they do it. Human beings are extraordinarily poor at hiding their emotions, even when they believe themselves to be skilled deceivers. The face alone betrays dozens of microsignals in fractions of a second. A tightening around the eyes that reveals suppressed anger, a subtle recoil that reveals discomfort, a pause half a beat too long that reveals a lie being constructed in real time. Most people never learn to see these signals because they are too consumed with managing their own emotional noise to notice anyone else's. This is precisely why the emotionally disciplined person holds such an advantage. Once your own inner storm has quieted, your senses become free to observe everything happening around you with startling clarity. Consider the negotiating table, the boardroom, the political summit, any arena where stakes are high and masks are worn. The untrained observer listens only to words. The master listens to everything beneath the words. The shift in posture when a topic becomes uncomfortable, the sudden overcompensating friendliness that often masks hostility, the flatness of tone that reveals someone has already made a decision and is merely performing deliberation for your benefit. These signals are not subtle to the trained eye. They are, in fact, glaringly obvious, but only to someone whose own emotional noise has been quieted enough to perceive them. This skill, once developed, becomes one of the most formidable weapons available to any strategist. If you can accurately read what another person feels before they consciously acknowledge it themselves, You gain the ability to anticipate their next move with unsettling precision. You can sense resistance forming before it hardens into refusal and intervene while it is still malleable. You can detect insecurity behind bravado and know exactly where the pressure point lies should you ever need to apply it. You can recognize the specific flavor of a person's fear, of irrelevance, of failure, of losing status, and understand precisely what they will sacrifice to avoid it. But here is the deeper, more unsettling layer of this skill. The same forces that allow you to read others can be used deliberately to shape what they feel. This is not manipulation in the crude sense of lies and coercion. It is something more elegant and, frankly, more effective. Human beings act overwhelmingly on emotion and rationalize afterward with logic. If you understand this, you stop wasting your energy constructing airtight, rational arguments to convince people, and instead focus on the emotional current beneath the surface, because that is what actually moves them. A leader who wants loyalty does not simply demand it. She creates conditions in which people feel seen, valued, and slightly indebted, so that loyalty becomes the emotional path of least resistance. A negotiator who wants concessions does not merely argue his position. He creates just enough anxiety about the alternative, the deal falling through, the opportunity slipping away, that agreement becomes the emotionally comfortable choice. This is not deception. It is architecture. You are not lying to anyone. You are designing the emotional environment in which their own true interests become clear to them. There is an important distinction here that separates the master from the mere manipulator, and it matters both strategically and morally. The manipulator creates false emotions through lies, manufacturing outrage over non-existent slights, inventing threats that do not exist. This approach is fragile because it depends on deception that can eventually be exposed, and once exposed, it destroys trust permanently. The master, by contrast, works with what is already true. She amplifies genuine incentives, clarifies real stakes, and allows people's authentic emotions to guide them toward outcomes that serve both parties. This is sustainable. This is what separates a reputation that compounds over decades from one that collapses the moment the mask slips. To develop this reading ability in yourself, you must train a specific kind of attention, one most people never cultivate, because modern life constantly pulls focus outward towards screens, notifications, and noise. Practice watching people in ordinary settings, a meeting, a family dinner, a queue at a shop, and try to name what they are feeling before they say a word. Notice the disconnect that often exists between what is said and what the body communicates. Notice how quickly a genuine smile fades compared to a performed one. Notice who in a group holds the emotional center of gravity, the person others unconsciously look toward before reacting themselves. Over time, this becomes second nature, an almost effortless radar operating beneath your conscious awareness. And when combined with mastery over your own emotional signals, the ability to reveal only what you choose to reveal, you arrive at a formidable combination. You see everything, and almost nothing is seen of you. This asymmetry is, in the truest sense, a form of power. Information flows towards you, almost none flows away from you. In any arena of competition, whether corporate, political, or personal, this asymmetry alone can determine who ultimately prevails. There is a reason history's most formidable figures, the ones who survived courts full of assassins, boardrooms full of rivals, revolutions that devoured the careless, shared a singular habit. They wore a mask. Not a mask of falsehood, but a mask of discipline. They understood a law that most people never fully absorb. Every emotion you display in public is information handed, free of charge, to people who may one day use it against you. Think of the face as a kind of currency. Every flinch, every reddening of the cheeks, every involuntary widening of the eyes, these are payments made unconsciously to anyone watching closely enough to collect them. The undisciplined person spends this currency constantly all day to everyone without ever realizing it is being spent. The disciplined person spends it rarely, and only when the payment serves a deliberate purpose. This is not a call to become emotionless. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what mastery actually requires. And it is worth dismantling immediately because it is the single most common error people make when they first attempt this discipline. A person who suppresses all emotion becomes brittle, prone to explosive leaks of feeling at the worst possible moments, and, perhaps more importantly, deeply unpersuasive. Human beings do not trust those who appear to feel nothing. They sense correctly that something is being hidden, and they become wary. The mask, properly worn, is not the absence of expression. It is the presence of chosen expression. This distinction is everything. The master does not eliminate the outward signs of emotion. She curates them. She may allow a flash of controlled anger to surface at precisely the moment it serves her interests, to signal that a line has been crossed, to command respect, to end a negotiation that has drifted too far in the wrong direction. But this display is not an involuntary leak. It is a deliberate choice, executed with the same precision an actor brings to a performance, deployed and withdrawn on command. History offers countless examples of leaders who understood this instinctively. Diplomats who survived decades of treacherous courts were rarely those who felt the least. They were those who revealed the least, and who understood precisely when strategic revelation would serve them better than concealment. A skilled negotiator sometimes allows a rival to see a flicker of frustration, not because he has lost control, but because that flicker, carefully timed, communicates something the rival needs to believe in order to make the next concession. This is emotion as instrument, not emotion as accident. To build this capacity in yourself, you must first accept a harder truth. Your face, in its untrained state, is working against you. It broadcasts information continuously and involuntarily. This is precisely why the first stage of developing the mask is not learning to perform new expressions, but learning to catch the old ones before they surface. The same strategic distance discussed earlier, now applied specifically to your outward presentation. In any moment of rising emotional intensity, before the face reacts, insert a half-second delay. In that delay, ask a single question: does revealing this serve me right now? Often the answer is no. Anger revealed in a moment of genuine vulnerability hands your opponent a map to your weaknesses. Fear revealed in a moment of negotiation invites exploitation. Excitement revealed too early in a deal invites your counterpart to raise the price, sensing your eagerness. In each of these cases, silence, a neutral, composed exterior, preserves your position far more effectively than any words could. This is why the most dangerous people in any room are often the quietest. Their stillness is not emptiness. It is a vault, and you have no idea what is inside. But the mask has a second, subtler function beyond mere concealment. It unsettles others. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable around those they cannot read. We are wired, evolutionarily, to scan faces constantly for signs of threat, trust, and intention. When that scan returns nothing, when a face reveals only calm, unreadable composure, it produces a low hum of anxiety in the observer, an instinctive sense that they are at an informational disadvantage. This anxiety, whether the observer consciously registers it or not, tends to produce deference. People instinctively grant more caution, more respect, and often more concessions to those whose reactions they cannot predict. This is why so many of history's most feared and respected figures cultivated deliberately an air of inscrutability. It was not vanity, it was strategy. An opponent who cannot read your reaction to bad news cannot know whether you are truly wounded or merely absorbing the blow with practiced calm. An opponent who cannot read your reaction to an insult cannot know whether retaliation is imminent or whether you have already decided the insult is beneath response. This uncertainty, held constantly in the mind of your rivals, is exhausting for them and advantageous for you. They spend energy trying to read you that you never have to spend trying to hide from them, because concealment, once mastered, becomes effortless. There is one final warning that must accompany this teaching, because without it, the mask becomes a prison rather than a weapon. The mask must never be worn with those who have earned genuine trust. A small, Carefully chosen circle where authentic emotion is not only permitted but necessary for the relationship to survive. A person who wears the mask universally, even with those closest to them, does not achieve mastery. They achieve isolation, and isolation in the long run is its own form of vulnerability. The mask is a tool for the arena of competition, not a replacement for the parts of life where vulnerability is the very thing that sustains you. There is a common assumption, rarely questioned, that emotions like anger, envy, and fear are simply obstacles to be eliminated on the path to mastery, enemies to be defeated and discarded. This assumption is not merely incomplete, it is a profound strategic error. The most formidable individuals throughout history did not eliminate their darker emotions. They transformed them, converting what would destroy a lesser person into fuel that propelled them further than calm contentment ever could. Consider anger. In its raw, unprocessed form, anger is indeed dangerous. It narrows thinking, provokes impulsive action, and hands ammunition to anyone patient enough to wait for you to overreach. But anger, properly refined, contains an extraordinary energy. It is at its core a signal of injustice, of a boundary crossed, of an unacceptable situation demanding change. The untrained person either explodes with this energy immediately, squandering it in a single dramatic outburst, or suppresses it entirely, letting it curdle into resentment that poisons them slowly from within. The master does neither. She captures the raw energy of anger and redirects it into disciplined, sustained action. This is a specific and learnable technique. When anger arises, instead of asking, "How do I release this?" the amateur's question, ask instead, "What does this anger reveal about what I actually want? And what sustained action would address it?" A rival's betrayal, properly processed, does not need to result in a shouting match that damages your reputation and accomplishes nothing. It can instead become the fuel behind years of disciplined, strategic work that ultimately renders the betrayer irrelevant. This is not suppression. The anger is not denied or hidden from yourself. It is simply rerouted from a single explosive moment into a sustained current that powers something far more consequential. Envy operates by an almost identical mechanism, though it is far more shameful to most people, and therefore far more likely to be denied rather than examined. Envy arises when we witness someone possessing something we secretly want, but have not admitted wanting, even to ourselves. The untrained response is to disparage the envied person, to construct elaborate justifications for why their success is undeserved or hollow. This response feels good momentarily and accomplishes absolutely nothing. The master instead treats envy as an extraordinarily precise diagnostic tool. Envy points with unerring accuracy directly at your own unacknowledged ambitions. Whatever you envy in another person is very often a map of exactly what you should be pursuing yourself, stripped of the comfortable excuse that you never wanted it in the first place. Fear deserves particular attention because it is perhaps the emotion most commonly mismanaged and the one whose mismanagement produces the most tragic waste of human potential. Fear, in its raw form, feels like a warning to retreat, to shrink, to avoid the thing that triggers it. But fear is frequently miscalibrated. It responds to social and reputational threats with the same intensity our ancestors reserved for genuine physical danger. The fear of public failure, of rejection, of humiliation, activates nearly identical neural circuitry to the fear of a physical predator, even though the actual stakes are almost never comparable. Understanding this miscalibration is itself liberating. Once you recognize that the fear gripping you before a difficult confrontation or a bold decision is largely a false alarm, an ancient system overreacting to a modern, survivable situation, its power over you diminishes substantially. But the master goes further still. She learns to read fear not as a stop sign, but as a compass, pointing directly toward the exact action most likely to produce meaningful growth. This is counterintuitive, and it runs against nearly every instinct in the human body, which is precisely why so few people ever master it. The action you fear most, the difficult conversation, the bold public stance, The ambitious pursuit you've told yourself is unrealistic is very often the exact action that would most transform your position, precisely because so few others are willing to move through that same fear. Fear, in this sense, functions as a filter that clears your competition. Most people retreat from what frightens them, leaving the terrain beyond that fear remarkably uncontested for anyone disciplined enough to proceed anyway. This transmutation process, anger into sustained strategic action, envy into a map of true ambition, fear into a compass toward uncontested opportunity, requires one crucial discipline that ties all three together: the refusal to act in the heat of the emotion itself. The energy must be captured, but the discharge must be deliberate, timed, and channeled into something constructive rather than immediate. This is why so many of history's most consequential achievements were forged in the aftermath of painful, humiliating, or infuriating experiences, not despite them, but directly because of them. The individual who was humiliated and simply nursed the wound accomplished nothing. The individual who transmuted that humiliation into years of relentless, disciplined effort often went on to achieve precisely what would make that humiliation permanently irrelevant. There is something almost alchemical in this process, and it is worth naming plainly. You are not being asked to feel less. You are being asked to feel everything fully and honestly, and then to refuse the cheap, immediate discharge that these emotions demand in favor of a slower, more strategic conversion. This is infinitely harder than either suppression or explosion. It requires you to sit with discomfort far longer than instinct wants to allow. But it is precisely this capacity to hold the poison without either swallowing it or spitting it uselessly at the nearest target that separates those who are shaped by their worst moments from those who are destroyed by them. If there is a single trait that unites nearly every figure in history who achieved lasting power, it is not intelligence, charisma, or even ruthlessness. It is patience, a specific, disciplined form of patience that has almost nothing to do with the passive waiting most people imagine when they hear the word. This is patience as an active strategic weapon, and it is perhaps the single most underrated skill in the entire arsenal of emotional mastery. Modern life conspires against patience with remarkable efficiency. Every notification, every instant message, every rapid news cycle trains the nervous system to expect immediate resolution, immediate reward, immediate response. This conditioning is catastrophic for anyone attempting to play a long strategic game because it produces an entire population primed to react impulsively at the first sign of provocation, discomfort, or delay. Understand this clearly. In a world where nearly everyone has been conditioned toward impatience, the disciplined exercise of patience becomes an almost unfair advantage. Consider what impatience actually costs a person in moments of conflict or negotiation. The impatient party reveals their hand prematurely, desperate to reach resolution and escape the discomfort of uncertainty. The impatient party accepts worse terms simply to end a negotiation that has grown tedious. The impatient party retaliates against a provocation instantly, without pausing to consider whether retaliation actually serves their interests or merely satisfies a momentary emotional itch. In nearly every one of these scenarios, the patient party, the one willing to sit calmly inside the discomfort of an unresolved situation, accumulates a decisive advantage simply by outlasting the other's tolerance for ambiguity. This is why the truly formidable strategists throughout history were rarely the most emotionally reactive people in the room. They were, almost without exception, the ones capable of the longest wait. They could absorb an insult without immediate response, not because they felt nothing, but because they understood that the value of a response is almost always higher when delivered at a moment of their own choosing rather than in the heat of provocation. They could watch a rival make a series of small, seemingly successful moves without panicking, because they understood that a strategic position unfolds over months and years, not single encounters, and that reacting to every individual skirmish is a recipe for exhaustion and strategic incoherence. There is a specific psychological mechanisms at play here that deserves close examination. Provocation is very often a deliberate strategy, whether consciously designed or instinctively deployed. An opponent who provokes you into an immediate reaction is, in effect, seizing control of the timing of the conflict, forcing you to fight on their schedule, under conditions of their choosing, while you are still emotionally destabilized. Every time you respond instantly to provocation, you hand your opponent this control freely, without even recognizing the transaction has occurred. The disciplined response to provocation is not suppression of the emotional charge it produces, but a deliberate refusal to let that charge dictate the timing of your response. Feel the provocation fully. Respond on your own schedule when the response can be calibrated for maximum strategic effect rather than maximum emotional release. This patience extends beyond individual confrontations into the much larger arena of long-term strategy, where its effects compound most dramatically. Ambitious people, particularly early in their development, are prone to a specific and costly error. They want recognition, status, and reward on a timeline that vastly outpaces the actual construction of genuine capability. This impatience produces a predictable pattern, overreaching for opportunities before the underlying skill or position can support them, burning valuable relationships through premature demands, and abandoning promising long-term projects the moment short-term results disappoint. The patient strategist, by contrast, treats time itself as an ally rather than an enemy. She understands that nearly every domain of genuine mastery requires a gestation period during which visible progress is slow, external validation is scarce, and the temptation to abandon the effort is strongest. The individuals who succeed in any competitive field are disproportionately those who develop the emotional discipline to continue investing during this invisible period. When impatience has already driven away most of their competition, there is a final, more unsettling dimension to strategic patience that deserves honest examination because it reveals something uncomfortable about how power actually accumulates over time. Patience allows you to wait not merely for opportunities to arise, but for your opponents to exhaust themselves through their own impatience. In any prolonged competition, the reactive, impulsive party tends to make a steady accumulation of small strategic errors, overcommitting resources in moments of excitement, overreacting to setbacks, revealing intentions prematurely out of anxiety. None of these errors alone is fatal, but compounded over months and years, they create openings that the patient observer, who has been conserving energy and gathering information the entire time, is perfectly positioned to exploit. This is not passive waiting. This is patience as active surveillance, as the accumulation of strategic capital, while your competition depletes theirs through the simple, repeated cost of emotional reactivity. To cultivate this capacity, you must train yourself to tolerate a specific and uncomfortable sensation, the itch of unresolved tension. Most people cannot bear this sensation for more than a few moments before seeking some action, any action, to relieve it. Begin practicing, in small and low-stakes situations, the deliberate delay of response. When an email angers you, resist the urge to reply within the hour. When a decision feels urgent, ask honestly whether the urgency is real or manufactured by your own discomfort with ambiguity. Over time, this tolerance expands, and with it expands your capacity to play strategic games across timescales that most people, trapped in their impatience, are simply unable to sustain. Everything discussed so far, the observation of your inner world, the reading of others, the discipline of the mask, the transmutation of negative emotion, the cultivation of patience, converges toward a single final transformation. This is the stage I call sovereignty, the state in which you are no longer governed by your emotional reactions, nor by the reactions of those around you, but instead stand as the calm, deliberate author of your own responses in every domain of life. This is not, and I want to be unambiguous about this, a state of emotional numbness or detachment from life's intensity. Quite the opposite. The sovereign individual often feels more deeply than most, precisely because she is no longer expending enormous energy suppressing, denying, or being blindsided by her own reactions. That energy, once wasted on internal conflict, becomes available instead for genuine presence, genuine connection, and genuine engagement with whatever the moment demands. The mask, the patience, the strategic distance, these are not walls built to keep life out. They are the disciplined structure that allows you to engage with life's full intensity without being destroyed or derailed by it. Sovereignty manifests first as an internal shift in how you relate to your own reactions. The unmastered person experiences an emotion and immediately becomes identified with it. I am angry, I am afraid, I am humiliated, collapsing entirely into the feeling as though it constitutes the whole of their identity in that moment. The sovereign individual experiences the same emotion but maintains a crucial sliver of separation. I am experiencing anger, I am experiencing fear, a distinction that sounds subtle but produces a profound practical difference. The emotion is permitted to exist fully without denial, but it no longer commands total authority over thought and action. There remains always a small but decisive space in which choice operates. This internal sovereignty produces, almost inevitably, a corresponding external effect, an aura of unshakable calm that others find magnetic, even as they cannot fully articulate why. Human beings are drawn instinctively towards stability, particularly in moments of crisis or uncertainty, because stability signals competence, safety, and reliable judgment. The sovereign individual, having done the difficult internal work of mastering her own reactions, becomes a natural gravitational center in any group. The person others look toward when a decision must be made under pressure, the person whose composure in a crisis inspires composure in everyone around her. This is not a minor social benefit. Across every arena of human competition, from business to politics to ordinary community life, this magnetic stability translates directly into disproportionate influence and trust. But sovereignty carries with it a responsibility that must not be ignored, because power without an accompanying ethical framework curdles into something genuinely dangerous. The same skills that allow you to master your own emotions and read those of others can, if wielded without restraint, be turned toward pure manipulation and exploitation of the people around you. History offers no shortage of examples of individuals who achieved extraordinary emotional discipline and used it purely in service of domination, deception, and cruelty. This is a genuine fork in the path, and it deserves to be named plainly rather than glossed over. The sovereign individual, at her best, uses this mastery not to exploit the emotional vulnerabilities of others, but to remain steady enough to act with genuine integrity even when circumstances make integrity difficult, to keep promises when breaking them would be easier, to treat others fairly even when unfairness would be more immediately profitable, to remain honest even under pressure that would tempt a less disciplined person toward convenient deception. This is, ultimately, the deepest purpose of everything explored in this script. Emotional mastery is not merely a tool for winning negotiations, outmaneuvering rivals, or accumulating status and influence, though it accomplishes all of these things reliably for those who cultivate it seriously. Its deepest purpose is the construction of a self that is no longer at the mercy of every provocation, every setback, every wave of feeling that arises unbidden throughout an ordinary life. It is the construction of a self capable of choosing, deliberately and consistently, who to become, rather than being endlessly reshaped by whatever emotional storm happens to be passing through in any given moment. This work is never finished. There is no final threshold beyond which emotional mastery becomes permanent and effortless. Even the most disciplined individuals throughout history continued to feel fear, anger, envy, and desire until their final days. The difference was never the absence of these emotions, but the increasingly skilled relationship they maintained with them over a lifetime of deliberate practice. Expect, therefore, not a single dramatic transformation, but a long, gradual refinement. Moments of genuine mastery interspersed with moments of old patterns reasserting themselves, each such moment offering fresh data for the ongoing project of self-command. If you take